Hello and welcome to Music Mates. In this episode, we're covering Frontiers, the 1983 album by the rock band Journey. This is the band's eighth studio album, went platinum 6 times in the USA and reached number 6 in the UK. In a new twist on the formula, I'll be the one going over the band's history and the album's story. 1973, Journey is founded in San Francisco. 1975, they released their self-titled debut album, a prog rock jazz fusion combo. Their sound features strong instrumentals and melancholic vocals. However, their label considers the band's sales underwhelming. Seems Journey had yet to take off. 1976, their third studio album, Next, still underperforms at whatever the sound equivalent of the box office is. The label is considering dropping the band. 1977, at the label's request, the band hires a new lead vocalist, Steve Perry, who brings a more commercial sound to the band. 1981, the band releases Escape, their most successful album, and begins the height of their musical fame. They blend their original strengths with more mainstream appeal, but conflicts over the band's creative direction still leave the band fraught with strife as members such as Ainsley Dunbar and Greg Rowley leave. 1983, they release... Wait a second. Before I go any further, I think this summary is a bit too short to really understand the picture this album paints. Frontiers isn't that simple. You can get it just from learning about the band's history. Frontiers isn't just an album. It's an all-encompassing electric orchestra filled with love, death, war, and the strongest emotions that mortal instruments can convey. It's not going to be that simple. We're going to take it further back. 1966, the progressive rock movement takes off from a chemical reaction of music genres. 1954, Neil Schon is born. Further back, 1932, the electric guitar is developed, allowing for a higher level of communication about the depths of the human condition, never before seen or heard. 1914, Franz Ferdinand is assassinated. 1903, the Wright brothers fly over Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. Mankind reaches for the skies once more. 1969, man lands on the moon, just 63 years later. 1752, Benjamin Franklin discovers electricity. 2,000 years ago, Jesus turned water into wine. Later, when his tomb was discovered to be empty, St. Mary also saw inscribed on the walls the main riff to separate ways. 45,000 years ago, the oldest work of art is inscribed on the wall of a cave, a painted image of hands overlapping. 300,000 years ago, humanity strikes flint together and a spark of flame forms. This ancient unnamed human brought light into the dark for the first time. From this point, humankind surges forward. 743 BC, Homer composes the Iliad, which could be considered the world's first rock opera. 1940s, the events of the film Oppenheimer happen in real life as humankind discovers the terrible potential of the atom. 2034, the astrolator drive is invented in Cuba, allowing for the collapse of space-time. The stars themselves are now within our grasp. 2045, every world government comes together to sign the Rosetta Convention, making human war a relic of history. Everyone holds hands around the earth in a big circle. 2059, a signal comes from the heavens. The world is thrown into the panic over the discovery of alien life. 2061, fire on Mars. Regretfully, war has been declared against the unknown fleet scouring Alliance space. 2073, Sam and Era, a fighter pilot trainee, steps into camp for the first time. Years of grueling effort are ahead, but they're ready for whatever it takes to be the best. 2075, Sam steals a glance across the crowded mess hall. A princess of Alliance royalty arrives on a PR tour in an attempt to boost morale amidst the faltering war effort. Anira hopes against hope that she'll look over at them. Was it just their imagination, or did she just smile back? 2076, a stolen moment together. They've become fast friends despite having so little in common. They sit on a cliff face overlooking the night sky's reflection into a glistening lake. The stars feel threateningly close. Sam leans in. I've been meaning to tell you something, Lucille. She cuts them off. You know, it's Lucy to you. She clasps her hand around Sam's, the warmth coming as a pleasant shock. And save it for after the ceremony, she adds with a sad smile. Days later, Graduation at Castro Academy is cancelled, and a mournful message booms over from everyone's personal monitor. Eden Capital Guard has fallen, and the Alliance declares a full surrender. All military efforts are cancelled henceforth. Panic spreads through the grounds, and the announcement continues. As part of the peace negotiations, a royal marriage is now underway between Lord Calcereth of House Redia and Princess... Sam cuts their monitor off. They won't bear to hear it, wiping tears with their layered formal wear, and they won't stand for it. Moments later, glass shatters, a break-in at the North launch pad. The experimental starfighter Axiom 1 sits unused and unguarded by any technical personnel amidst the panic of the announcement. Now or never, Sam clambers into the cockpit. All systems green, launch permissions denied, the cold voice calls from the console. Thankfully, the override code 0451 had been taped to a nearby display monitor. Astrolator engaged, plasma concentration rising. Anira readied their display with a practiced caution. They had no clue if this was a good idea, or what untold damage it would cause. They just knew that it needed to be done. Now. Axiom 1 launching. The bright burn of atmosphere whizzes past, and space smashes into view. Only one path remains as Sam plots a course to Eden, Mars. Estimated travel time, 44 minutes and 9 seconds. The album Frontiers is what plays on this journey. So what do people think of the album that plays in that moment?
Ethan, what were your honourable mentions again?
I think it's probably best I wait until the end to talk about those.
Yeah, that's the detour. That's the DLC to the space
Have
campaign.
Have you been writing that for the last couple of weeks?
I wrote it like yesterday. And also it was really happened. It's truth.
When you were listing the dates, I did think it was very Dr. Manhattan. So when you started jumping around, I did get very excited.
So, Frontiers, Journey, the rock album. I quite like it.
It's just a bit good.
Yeah.
Bit of good fun, isn't
I
it?
think the reason why I wanted to do that entire song or that story is because I feel like, although there is some interesting things that happen in the band's history about like creative decisions and like the label, like all the political movement, I feel like Frontiers, I'm gonna make that mistake 1,000 times. Frontiers by Journey, like, despite like, I don't think the lyrics are like exceptionally like deep or complicated or like unique even really, but despite all that, I still think it paints such a clear, like, resonant, emotional picture that I was literally just like spurred into action of like, I have to write down like this scene that is playing in my head of someone doing something incredibly stupid and reckless in the name of love, also in a spaceship. And I think that's a better context for understanding the the emotional themes of the album. I quite like it. I think it starts quite strong. What are people's initial thoughts?
I think just the first time I listened to this album, Tony, was I was in the car with you and Ethan. We were travelling up to see Johnny. And it's something I thought then, and in subsequent listens I've thought more. It's kind of about why I think this appeals to you, and you can tell me if I'm right or not. And I think that some of this kind of like power ballady kind of rock music of the 1980s, it has such like a powerful like kind of sincerity to it. That it's big riffs, big hair, synthesizers, very not very cynical, and there's something very kind of anime opening theme about it.
You're so right.
And that I just it's a connection I never really made, but I'm like, oh yeah, I get why this kind of like it's the red line of music in a way. You know what I mean? I get why Tony likes it so much.
Such an intense compliment.
As for me,
I think you're right.
I like it as well. But yeah,
that's great. I think powerful sincerity is a really good way to describe the sort of angle of approach, the launch vector, if you will, of this album. I think the thing that stands out to me most is like the vocals. They have such like an incredible emotional weight behind them, but unlike things that like say also have an incredible emotion, maybe like hardcore metal music. It's not like a screamy like texture. It's not like Symphogear, where they're singing their throats out. It has such like a clear quality to it that I think really balances well with the heartfelt messaging of fighting in the name of love.
It reminds me of the Stereophonics, that sort of feels like dripping with emotion kind of singing. Although I think Stereophonics, plays a bit more on perhaps more interesting and complex emotions. Whereas I think Journey in the album Frontiers are just a bit more. I mean, there's still some sort of interesting things. So I think Center My Love is it's more than just a love song kind of thing, because it's a more kind of complex thing of, well, this is a relationship that didn't work out, had to stop. I've not seen you since, but I still do kind of hope you're doing well. That is like a different kind of like it's not just
it's not like a One Direction
classic love song. They are playing around with
but
with more
everything about
things.
the sound of this band is quite seismic and OTT. I think that's kind of what you were trying to get at when you were talking about the differences between the kind of music that Journey would do compared to Stereophonics, and the sort of emotions that they're dealing with, and also the sound that comes with that too.
Yeah, I think you're right about calling it seismic. I think also as well, like the sort of guitar, and also they occasionally do like some piano or some like synth. I think that really gives it like that sense of like cosmic scale that made me think of like, man, this album should be played in space at some point in time in the far future.
See, it's interesting that I don't think I felt as much of like a space theme before I like properly looked at the album cover and was like, oh, they've gone for like a sci-fi look. Oh, that's okay. I love the design of the album, and a bunch of their other album covers just look very interesting and engaging. But I wouldn't necessarily have placed that just from the music. I guess there's some of that kind of. Yeah, I guess I can hear some of that more like rock opera-y stuff now. Now I'm thinking of it through that lens, but I don't know. It just feels like fun rock.
Yeah, and to be fair, it is fair that you didn't immediately get Slifer, because there's a lot of like, I'd say more like kind of like Conan the Barbarian style, like pulp fantasy, like lyrics in it. Like one of the songs is called like Edge of the Blade. Like that's some brawny dude swinging around a sword, But I think it's interesting that you mentioned comparing it to what was it, Stereophonic, and that I think the there are kind of some of the songs in this album that do venture into a more melancholic mood. A lot of them are very upbeat and like bring that like hell yeah intensity, but some are like very like almost mournful in a way, despite like the intensity of the backing track, which I feel is quite interesting, and also is probably more true to the band's original roots when they were like back in 1970s, when no one cared about them.
Yeah, I mean, it's every song, whether it's one of those kind of upbeat kind of rock anthems, or as you say, the kind of different kind of tone in the album, they all follow a kind of similar structure of having a very kind of repetitive chorus, where it, it's not quite simplistic, but it's quite honest and catchy, and will be in the song, for 4 to 5 times. Because another thing about the album is the songs are quite long. But for me anyway, you've got like, a 5-minute song that repeats the chorus, quite a few times. Kind of repetitive, but in a good way. And they're definitely like, for me anyway, like the strength of the album is the strength of those choruses, and how catchy some of them are. primarily Separate Ways, which is the opening track and is probably the best track in the album, has that. And I think even like looking down, Chain Reaction, a song I really like. I really like Troubled Child as well. Again, it's for me, it's all about the kind of chorus in those songs.
Yeah, I think Harry's absolutely right. They are very, very catchy, and Separate Ways is quite a solid, proper introduction to the album. I think the sequencing is really strong as well. We talked about how that they're within the kind of confines that they set themselves in tonally. There is still a good balance between the rockier, heavier songs, but then there's more power ballady songs in between. And it continues that way generally for most of the album, which I think gives it some of the variety and distinctness between songs as you go from track to track. I also think that and I know this is probably a little bit of a hot take, but I think the album actually gets better as it goes on. I prefer the second half of the album over the first, and I think it's just because for me there was quite I don't know if sudden's the right word, but there was a very clear change in energy, specifically around the riffs of the songs. The riffs that the songs are built on. They have like a little bit more of a crunch to them, and I think the synth work is a little bit better as well. When you contrast songs like Edge of the Blade, which Tony mentioned a second ago, Troubled Child, which might be my favourite song on the album, and Back Talk, with songs like After the Fallen Faithfully, there's definitely a switch of pace for me. And the fact that Edge of the Blade specifically marks that divide for me, because it has this very sort of thrash metal kind of riff that opens it up that I think is quite cool and carries the song well. It really did pave the way for the second half to be as strong as it was for me compared to the first half, which I thought meandered a little bit too much.
Yeah, I think it's what helps the album feel so tight is that it starts off with what I, at least off the top of my head, feel like the more slower and thoughtful ones, and then it sort of ramps up and then kicks into the more punchy ones. And I think definitely by the time you reach Back Talk, it's very much a sort of like little jabs at you.
I was going to say,
you're
Back
making
Talk
sure you're
for
still
me
engaged.
is a really strange addition to the album. I don't want to say that it doesn't fit very well, but it feels out of place and in a good way. And I think I think it's particularly the absence of synths on the song makes it feel like it's missing something. But I don't really. I'm trying not to speak in such a pejorative, negative way. I do mean these things well. I still enjoyed the song despite that. I think it's got a bit of a grittier tone. I really like the drum rolls that take place in between all those suspended guitar chords. I think they're quite nice, and it gives the song a bit more of a primal mood, which is kind of closer to a sound that appeals to me, other than some of the other things that were going on throughout the album.
I think
interesting.
You go ahead, Tony.
Oh, sorry. So it's interesting that you mentioned that Back Talk feels a little bit tacked on, Ethan, because it's actually true that Troubled Child and Back Talk were originally not going to be part of the album. And in fact, I think we have listened to a sort of extended version by accident. Whoops, my bad. Because in actual 1983, it ends at Rubicon, and Only the Young and Ask the Lonely were going to be the two songs that were in place of Troubled Child and Back Talk. But then they later just put them all together and also added Liberty and The Only Solution from other stuff they had done at the time. So I think you're right. I think you're kind of spotting that they kind of were weighing it up between those two pairs of songs of like which fits better. And I'd be interested to hear if you think that maybe if you noticed that Back Talk was a bit of a like a standout, like not fit in song, that they perhaps should have had it be in the only other way around, with Only the Young and Ask the Lonely in the original run and Back Talk and Troubled Child being in some of their later.
For sure. I think I mentioned this, but the key thing for me is just the fact that there's no synth work on it. So it's like it clearly stands out as having something that's different about it, whereas the synth work is with so much 80s music around that time anyway. It's such a big part of the overall aesthetic, and it's a massive part of this album on every other song. It just it seemed a bit strange in a good way that this song didn't have any synth work on it, because, like I said, it feels a bit closer to what I like. Like, I'm much more of a, plug your lead into your amp and just play the song without all this really glossy production. I quite like raw styles of music, and Backtalk appealed to me in that way because of it.
It is a breath of fresh air, kind of, just in being different. Not that the rest is, I don't know, confining, but I think that is what this music, or like the whole album, or at least the version I listened to did end on Rubicon, but yeah, the album does feel like it has got a consistent feel to it, but also it is still like playing around a bit with some sort of different genres and styles to some degree, or just like they feel free to roam. But yeah, one of the things I do, so at least with the version I listened to, where you've got Frontiers as the penultimate song on the album, it's an interesting choice for like the song that the album's named after. So we've got that kind of idea of like being the edge, new frontiers, whatever, just based off of like title and vibes, having that as the penultimate song, and then you have Rubicon to end it. You've got that idea of kind of like passing it, going beyond as like a big statement, and then finishing on that, just on a like based off of two words of Frontiers and Rubicon. That is a fun last two songs to have, or like ideas to have on an album, of just sort of suggesting you've gone to the edge and now you've stepped beyond. And then you end it.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I don't know what those other two songs are.
I think the lyrics of both those songs kind of work. I had a similar thought, Johnny, and I similarly, we obviously listened to the same version of the album. I think it works really well. The moment's kind of passed, but I completely disagree with you all about Backtalk. I don't like it at all, but I don't really want to spend like another sort of 5-10 minutes talking about basically just everything you said. Kind of like, I don't want to talk in a negative kind of pejorative way. I would pretty much say all those things, but it just didn't work for me at all. But I guess I like that it is a little bit more experimental, and it's not just the same sound the entire time. So I appreciate them trying something different. But Edge of the Blade and Backtalk for me pretty stand out as the two songs I like the least. Sandwiched in between Troubled Child, which is just a completely certified banger. So it's interesting to hear that it wasn't originally going to be in the album, because I think it's probably my second favorite song after Separate Ways.
Yeah, it's definitely the one I like the most. I've listened to it. Also, I've listened to the album now about 4 or 5 times, and I think this is probably the only song that I would go out of my way to listen to outside of the album. I just think we've talked a little. Harry mentioned that the thing that carries the whole album is the strength of those choruses, and for me, there isn't a song that I think demonstrates this better than Troubled Child. It still has that, I will say, slightly kind of cheesy, emphatic feel to it that a lot of the songs have, but it's so easy to get swept up into the atmosphere of those of the chorus on this song, and I think the vocal performance from I think his name is Steve Perry, the vocalist of the band, deserves a bit of praise on this one, because there's a lot of lament in his delivery, and I think it contrasts really well with the chorus generally and the drumming pattern, and I think just altogether it's a real strong highlight from the album.
Yeah, I agree that Troubled Child is really good, but I feel like even though it's kind of like the default answer, I think Separate Ways might just have to be my favorite. Like, it's such like I think it's somewhat what someone else said, that like they think that the second album picks up more, and I feel personally that it's like the majority of the momentum you get at the very start, and then it's just like there's just like enough of like a little boost every now and then with like Troubled Child, to like some of the other ones to get like through the entire run of it, because I feel like that three run of 3 songs at the start, Separate Ways, Center My Love, and Chain Reaction, are all incredibly strong. And I don't know if you remember this from last episode when we recorded it many millennia ago, but we were talking about best 3-song run of an album of all time. And I don't know, I don't think it has like the cultural staying power compared to Michael Jackson. I don't know if anything on earth does, but I still think that Separate Ways, Send Her My Love, and Chain Reaction are such a micro album within within the album that have such like an incredible they encapsulate the vibe really well of the overall experience of like the intensity, and then the sort of then going into the more slow, more like that melancholy, and then bringing it back with Chain Reaction. It's just like a incredible sequence, and it might be in contender for my favorite 3-1 song.
I definitely agree. I think that the beginning of the album, like with most albums, is my favorite kind of part, and I do love that 3-song run. I think Send Her My Love is the weakest of the three, for me. But I still think it sets it off in a really good path. The other thing I do think though is I don't think it could ever sustain that level of. I think 40 minutes of songs just like those three would be exhausting.
Yeah,
and I do think it does outstay its welcome a little bit, this album. I think because it's so earnest and it's so produced and it's so 80s and it's very itself. It's kind of in its excess. I do find it a little bit overlong. Like every song there's probably like 20% of fat on most things. But I think that's just a personal preference thing. Because there's been moments I've listened to individual songs from the album outside of the context of it, and I've listened to the album as a whole, and I've been really in the mood and amped. And it could just be that I wasn't really in the mood for it when I listened to it last. But if you're not on its wavelength, it can be a bit grating when you're hitting that like fourth round of the chorus.
Yeah, for me, I just think I appreciate the earnestness enough that it always carries it through. But I think you are right that sometimes I do sort of self-adjust the pacing if I'm doing like a full-on listen, where I'm like, okay, I really like this. I've started from the great start of the first three, but now I'm getting to Faithfully, and you know what? I'm just gonna like skip this to get to Troubled Child quicker. I'll get to have Edge of the Blade as the warm up, and then get that one. So I understand what you're saying. I just think that like with a little bit of my own like I kind of skipping around. I feel like I can get the ideal experience every time, or at least whenever I'm in the mood for it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting looking at this bit of a jump on topic, but seeing on Spotify which are the most listened songs on this album. So Separate Ways is massively ahead, 300 million, followed by Faithfully, 265 million, which I find interesting because I don't think Faithfully left much. Or at least not compared to the others. I don't think it left quite as much.
I think I might know why. Sorry, Johnny, to cut in there. It's probably just because I would imagine that the people that would listen to Frontiers probably aren't 24-year-old guys. It's probably people that have a lot of nostalgia for the 80s. And I was going to touch on this a little bit later and why this kind of aesthetic overall doesn't really appeal to me as much as other 80s rock aesthetics particularly, but there's a lot of like sentimentality and like what's the word I'm looking for,
nostalgia.
No, I said nostalgia already. It is like there is a sentimentality that comes with particular 80s music that also means that it comes across maybe a little bit cheesy and tacky. And I don't want to say that this album is cheesy or tacky, but the whole power ballad thing that's going on, something like did you say the song was called Faithful or Faithlessly? I'm sorry, I can't. Faithfully. I think people like those kind of slower, mellower songs just because it's more in keeping with a vibe that was really, really popular at the time. So that's why I would say that would be as popular as it is. But it could also just be that there were only 2 singles from the album, that one, and then Separate Ways, and that's why it's as popular as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think maybe some of it's what I know of my own mum's music tastes, where I feel like she'd be more rocking out to Chain Reaction than she would sort of sitting with Faithfully. So that's probably coloured some of my idea what would be one of the larger songs off this album. But yeah, it's just a bit interesting. Well, hearing Tony muse that gets some of the later songs, he might skip over it and sort of think. But that is apparently the second most listened song on the album. Clearly, for a lot of people, that is the second big draw. Because then after that, it's a massive drop. It's a massive drop down. 30 million for "Center My Love."
Weak.
Pitiful. Only.
Speaking of the what you're talking about, Johnny, looking at the viewing figures for Journey. I mean, I think we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. That if you've heard of Journey, it's likely because of one song that's not on this album. "Don't Stop Believing," which I think has over 1 billion streams from when I looked at it earlier. And it's a song that's been discussed on the Mediate podcast at length previously in a different context by me and Ethan, because it's famously used and not used in its entirety in the final scene of The Sopranos. And I think another reason that the song's so famous, not only because it's a great song and it's been played to death, but I think the TV show Glee did like a version of it in that show's first season, and I feel like that kind of brought that song back for like another audience, and then obviously the use in The Sopranos. But yeah, before we listened to Separate Ways, Tony, I only knew Journey from Don't Stop Believing, which again has a slightly different sound to this album. So yeah.
And it's funny that you talk about the different contexts in which these older songs can be sort of brought back into the public sphere, because the thing that got me like back considering this is like my pick. I think I had heard like a couple Journey songs before from my dad, but the thing that got me back into it was Separate Ways has kind of like caught on as like a meme backing track to like TikTok or YouTube short like edits of anime characters or people just generally just beating the fuck out of each other. And there's one in particular of like an Elder Scrolls Online cinematic where one like big armored knight beats the fuck out of 3 different goons to the backing of like Separate Ways, and that's like, man, I was like, what is this? Like, I have to know more. And I think I think that was really cool, that it's just like normally there's a lot of like, I don't want to say outright disdain, but like a little bit of a negative connotation around the music that generally gets like popular, like newer stuff. And the fact that like occasionally like no people do like look back, and I was like, hang on, 40 years ago people were onto something. People were onto straight heat, and you know what, it needs to go to this cap cut edit of Goku beating up someone.
Tony,
and I really like that.
This is the story of my fucking life, man, when it comes to music. Like, I am such an old soul. I don't listen to much modern music, and when I do, it's pretty much just rap music and hip-hop, but, like, pretty much all music I listen to isn't even from this century. It's from the 90s going backwards, so you don't need to tell me about Straight Heat. I know how great the 80s was, and I know how shit things are now. So, yeah, can definitely
I guess I'm
relate.
similar to you, Tony, in that I can only discover good music through kind of niche uses in popular culture.
Yeah, I would never like have a band I like and then be like, maybe I should listen to a different album they've done. It's like, no, I'm gonna scroll through YouTube shorts until I see a good video of Freezer getting destroyed.
Well, now you mention it, I did actually see a meme edit the other day with Separate Ways playing, and I thought, oh, that's a weird coincidence. But now I know the origin.
I was going to say the same thing as you, Tony, about like not feeling compelled to listen to other albums by a band whose one album that you like. But then you mentioned that their debut album was a prog rock jazz fusion project, and I was like, I can't imagine this band doing a prog rock jazz fusion project. I've got to check that out at some point, because that sounds really interesting. especially if it's from the 70s, because that's when a lot of prog rock bands were. I mean, we did King Crimson. I know that was an 80s pick, but their roots are in the late 60s, early 70s, so I can imagine Journey probably did produce something quite good in that style.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I only gave it a quick listen just to give it the sort of like, where did this band
Was it
start,
very
like,
artsy?
reference point. It was very artsy. It's also like without Steve Perry, it definitely has a very different quality to it.
Okay.
It's much more leaning into the sort of like melancholy of like similar to like I'd say like Faithfully, but with a more like kind of out there musical styling in terms of the instrumentals. But I didn't give it a full listen, so I'm not fully calmed. Until it's used in an isekai video where someone learns how to cast the sickest spell ever, I'm not listening to it.
Harry was talking a minute ago about the elephant in the room being "Don't Stop Believing," and I feel the same way, and I actually feel like "Don't Stop Believing" is kind of allegorical in a way for how I feel about this album, in the sense that this aesthetic generally doesn't normally appeal to me when it comes to rock music. It's just not my thing. The whole hair metal glam rock stuff, it's just not really for me. And Don't Stop Believing was kind of part of that bracket where for me it was always like a cheesy, uninspired like song from the 80s that's overused a little bit. Like, I don't know if it's from the 80s, but I always get it confused with The Final Countdown when I was younger. I'm not too sure why. But then it was used in The Sopranos. And it's used really, really well in The Sopranos. And now whenever I listen to Don't Stop Believing, I feel a bit emotional. And it's because the song itself is quite emotional and quite powerful, but it's also because I associate it now with something that is the final scene of something that's quite important to me. And with this album, the first time that I listened to it wasn't even in the car on the way to Johnny's. I actually listened to it at work some months before that because you were talking about picking it on the podcast. And I had that feeling of like, I mean, this isn't too bad, but it is also like very, very 80s, and it's not really for me. But I've listened to it 4 or 5 times now. I've listened to it again today, and there's something about the mood of the album that just makes me enjoy it more and more the more I listen to it. And today, for the first time listening to it, I was like, I can't believe that's already over. Where have those 43, 44 minutes just gone? They just absolutely flew by. It was great.
Yeah, I think you're right that there's something about the quality of this album. Maybe it's like almost impartially because like part of its simplicity that allows it to like pick up this sort of emotional context around it and sort of like marinate in your memory the more like you hear it in association with other things such as the Elder Scrolls video. It's like it like builds on itself in your head, if like just gets like cooler and cooler, which I really like.
I mean, this is like quite a damning admission from all of us that basically a lot of our taste in music or discovery of it's just coming from like other popular culture. But I think my sort of passion or love for very earnest 80s music comes from Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, where like a part of that game, because it's set in the 80s, is kind of like going around bases in Afghanistan and like finding like cassette tapes like hidden in like kind of like outposts. And then you can kind of play them through your helicopter as you're kind of doing raids. So a lot of that, like, I mean, I guess the intent is to kind of create like a tonal dissonance between like the content of the gameplay and like the very like upbeat, cheesy 80s music. But what that has done is it's given me a massive soft spot for like certain 80s like bangers, you know, like a Kids in America and Man Eater and then those kind of songs. And I think it definitely ties into why this kind of sound does appeal to me, as a contrast to Ethan, who doesn't like or didn't like this sound quite as much. Yeah,
but that's only because of how I grew up and what my parents were listening to, and they always preferred. It's sort of hard for me to say harsher and harder styles of rock because I know that this is technically a hard rock album because it's kind of metal adjacent, I guess, but it's not really. It's not the kind of hard rock that I'm used to, where I'm talking about listening to music that's incredibly unpolished, rough around the edges, really noisy, loud, aggressive, intense, and kind of growing up listening to that kind of music means that I gravitate more to bands from this era. Like, I mean, I guess the Pixies are probably a little bit further on in the grand scheme of things, but bands like that have a bit more of an untamed sound. It's just what I naturally latch on to more, and I can't help that. But I did really give a go with this album, and I'm glad I did, because it's only grown on me. Even though it does have quite a commercial sound, which again is not something that I'm really used to listening to, I still really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's interesting that normally they adopted a more commercial sound is used in like a negative way, whereas from what little I listened to, I feel like it was almost like the missing piece to the puzzle that like really was like, oh, that this is what completes the sound to make it like have that intense sense of emotional weight that was just sort of like lying underneath the surface before and in some of their older
you know what's really interesting, Tony? Sorry, it's you saying that is so true, because you talked about the fact that their debut album was this weird prog rock avant-garde shit. So many prog rock bands like Genesis and Yes as well started off making music like that, and then their hardcore fans saw them as kind of selling out when they went on to make really a kind of the kind of music that has a bit more of a pop sensibility about them, and it sounds like this band did the same. There's even a really funny scene in American Psycho where Patrick is talking about how Genesis is it Genesis or is it Huey Lewis and the News? No, I think it is. I think he's talking about Phil Collins, because Phil Collins was in Genesis originally, and he says that their early work was a bit too new wave for his tastes. And, I mean, American Psycho is all about, blending in with your environment and just copying other people's opinions and stuff. And I just think it's funny that because that character encapsulates that, he wouldn't like the kind of experimental weird stuff they were making early on in their career, but the stuff that's a lot more marketable, that's a lot more in the charts, like this album certainly was really high up in the rock charts. I think not even the rock charts, I think I had a look earlier and it peaked at number 2 in the US Billboard, which is, as the album peaked at number 2 in the US Billboards, which is quite a big achievement, considering the kind of acts that they would have probably had to be competing with around that time. Not just the pop acts, but the rockier acts like, I don't know, Bon Jovi and Guns N' Roses and groups like that. It is quite impressive.
Yeah, it's definitely they definitely earned it. I think there's something about this, like the intensity they bring that really sells them apart from a lot of other music that I've listened to, which is good. I quite like it. I think they do a really good job of like taking like something, like, again, I say simple but not in like a bad way, about like this sort of like the love or like, oh, they're going separate ways, and they like deliver it with such intensity that it goes from just being like a personal experience to being like, this is important to all of humanity right now level of experience.
Yeah.
Which is try to get across.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. We should probably do some honorable mentions to see what was running around at the same time.
Yeah, so there are a few albums this year, one of which I probably would have done if I hadn't so kindly let Tony pick this album for.
Thank you.
That's okay. So I want to give a shout out to the album Power, Corruption and Lies by New Order. It's a really, really great synth pop album. Essential listening from the 80s, really. And it was the first time that New Order kind of came into their own after Joy Division disbanded. I think it's a bit of a seminal work, really. I also want to give a shout out to Synchronicity, which was the final album that the Police did. It's an album that I enjoy less and less every time I listen to it, which is a bit of a shame. but it's still good. There's some great tracks on it, like Every Breath You Take, which is one of the best songs of the 80s, hands down. And the Police have always been a group that are really good at evoking kind of rich, vivid imagery of other sort of faraway places, like a desert or a jungle, and you definitely get a bit of that on the album as well. And then I also want to give a shout out to Speaking in Tongues by Talking Heads, which is a great album. And REM's debut album Murmur is also a real gem from this year too.
Speaking in Tongues is definitely one of my favourite albums of all time. Yeah, great pick. I'm not the picked it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I know what you meant.
We can't just do Talking Heads albums.
No, which is a shame for Johnny, right? Because I know he would just love to do that year in, year out.
I know it's stomped on my dreams.
Tony, I could feel that you were sort of leaning towards us giving scores and conclusions and stuff.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you
closing remarks and then.
Cool.
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. I wanted to ask you first. Is this album especially important to you for any particular reason other than you heard a song on TikTok from it that made you want to listen to it more? Like, you mentioned your dad earlier on in the episode. I don't know if that's part of it. I just kind of wanted to know a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I probably had heard To Separate Ways like when I was younger, but honestly, I don't. Unlike some other albums, I didn't initially have a strong like personal connection to it. However, I think the fact that I have like this is famously one of my two albums that I listen to when I go on a run. The other one being The Gods We Can Touch by Aurora, and that's it. That's all my music taste that I've discovered independently by myself ever. So I think from that, like, it's like ingrained itself in my head as like such and heart as well, and soul, as like such a feel good, like uplifting, especially like motivational song. It definitely is something that I'll go to. It's like I need the power charge to hit me. You know, let's put on Chain Reaction and do the dishes. like the fate of the earth depends on it. So in that sense, I do think I do have like a good personal connection to it. Which again aids to sort of my opinion of it and my experience with it.
Cool. Do you want me to go first? Considering I always go last.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, give you the taste.
So, I don't really have much more to say that I haven't already said. I feel like I've got across my points really well. I do like the album. It grows on me every time that I listen to it. Like I said, the core aesthetic of the band sound, at least on this album, it's not quite there with the stuff that really I can connect with on a deep level. So that will always stop it from getting a higher score no matter how many times I listen to it, which I think is kind of a shame, but it's also just the way I am, really. I think it's a really consistent album as well. I don't think there's I can't think of any songs on the album that I dislike or I think are bad, just ones that I think are a bit more, I guess, flat or bland compared to something like Trouble Child, which is a great pick from the album. So I think I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. That's my score.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think I was sort of pleasantly surprised by the album kind of going in. From the first few notes, I was like, ooh, I'm not sure this is going to be quite my jam. But then sort of got more engaged with it as it went along. And then listened to it quite a bit more than I did Thriller. I found that, yeah, I found it more engaging and better to listen to. I'm feeling something. Yeah, I can feel some people getting very angry with me saying that. But yeah, it just felt fun. Although sort of at the end of it, like it has been a nice album to listen to, but I was sort of as I reached sort of, getting ready to record this, and was sort of thinking, will I go back and listen to any of the songs off it? And I don't think I will. Just sort of an odd thing where it's like I've enjoyed my time with it, but I think that's kind of be done with the album now. And then it gets difficult when it comes to my now rigid scoring structure of only giving it, is it a 10 out of 10, a 1 out of 10, or somewhere in the middle? And I'm going to have to put it somewhere in the middle, but it's near the upper end of that somewhere in the middle. But I'm sticking to my guns, and that means it's still a 5. It almost bumped Thriller down to a 1 just so it would be on a different tier to it.
Doing this new system.
The trinary rating system. I'm interested. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it has mostly just meant I've given everything a 5. Because this is what I realised the difficulty of. This is a good album. It's above a meh, but I don't have a space for that other than just it's in,
Johnny, there is a space. It's called a 6.
I consider a great or notable album.
That's crazy talk.
Yeah, if I was free to pick other numbers, it probably would have been a 7.
Yeah, I'm
Retcon 3. It's coming, boys.
For me, this is closer to a 5 than a 10. But luckily, I can pick other numbers, so I'll pick a 7.
Okay, so I'm staring down this armada of 7s. Harry, do you have any more things to say before I go onto my closing remarks?
I think I covered it. I think I've kind of given my full opinions. I think it's slightly clouded by the fact that I just wasn't really feeling the album on my third listen today. Whereas first and second listen, I probably enjoyed it a tad more. And I think it's partially, I think you have to meet something this bombastic and sincere where it's at.
Definitely.
And like you say, sometimes separate ways will come on and you'll be doing something in life and it'll give you that extra motivation. I've had the song Separate Ways stuck in my head for about 2 months. Just on loop, and it can be a tad annoying sometimes. But yeah, it's a great pick. I've enjoyed this episode, so thanks Tony for taking over hosting duties. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what you've got to say about it.
All right. So I think I would like to sort of center my closing remarks around just sort of the general it's hard to put into words the intensity of the emotions this album conveys to me. I feel like I can say it motivates me, but plenty of things motivate me. This is a second tier of motivation that is exclusive to Frontier by Journeys. That is wow, that I feel it in my veins. I think it's interesting that someone mentioned that there are probably a lot of people that listen to Frontiers by Journey and get that sort of sense of nostalgia and almost they're mourning the fact that the past is gone. Oh man, the 80s are never coming back. Oh man, let's listen to Faithfully and be sad about it. Because I do understand that. I feel like there's something, a catharsis you can get from sort of re-experiencing that, if you were around back then. But I sort of came at it from the opposite angle of not only coming at it from the TikTok angle, but also just the fact that listening to this album properly on its own, it just injected into my brain this sort of sense of optimism and instead of nostalgia, the opposite of looking forward to a brighter future. I was I have to do something funny with the intro where I make it about an AU space travel starfighter thing rather than just going into the details of the dates and the history and the technical specifications, because I think that better conveys the heart and soul and DNA and space power that is laced within Frontiers by Journey. I am going to give it a 10 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah, very well said.
And we will join you next episode. What are we doing, Ethan?
We are doing one of my absolute, not just favourite albums of the 80s, but one of my favourite albums of all time, of what I think is to be a virtually flawless album in almost every way. We are doing Purple Rain by Prince. I'm really looking forward to it, and I also hope you guys enjoy the album as much as I do too. We'll see you then.
Wait, Ethan, I think you need to stay on. The other two can go. Just when we were talking about The Sopranos and our Sopranos pod, I was gonna say like what the thing at the end that really summarizes the show, but I think my mic cut out at the wrong moment. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to actually finish that point and kind of summarize what I really think about The Sopranos. And that is that I think in the final scene it kind of tells you what happens to Tony Soprano, and what that is